In a dojo ruled by quiet whispers and unspoken hierarchies, two black girls, Maya and Jasmine, stand alone against the tide of tradition and prejudice. Every night, they face the sharp fists of black belts who think their skin is a weakness and their presence an insult. But these sisters are more than what the world sees. They are warriors forged in the secret hours of cold garages and bruised knuckles, bonded by blood and an unbreakable will. Tonight, their quiet defiance is about to shatter every expectation. Get ready to witness the transformation of victims into victors, because this isn't just a fight for rank. It's a fight for respect, for belonging, and for the right to stand unbowed in a world that would rather see them broken. Don't miss what happens next. The early evening sun hung low in the sky, washing the small town of Millbrook in a soft amber light that made the warrior's path, karate dojo, glow like a temple of discipline and tradition. The mirrored walls inside caught that light and fractured it, sending thin shards of gold streaking across the polished wooden floors, the heavy bags swaying gently with each breath of wind that snuck in from the open door. Maya and Jasmine Taylor stepped hesitantly into this world, their twin reflections merging and splitting in the mirrored glass like a living painting, their brown skin and bright, searching eyes in stark contrast to the sea of pale uniforms moving with practiced ease. They were used to feeling out of place, but tonight that feeling pressed in on them like the humid air of an August evening, hot and thick and almost suffocating. Their father had always told them to walk like they owned any room they entered, that no one could take their worth from them unless they gave it away. But as they tied the brand new yellow belts around their waists, the cotton stiff and unfamiliar under their fingers, that quiet fire of his words felt more like a flickering candle against the cold wind of uncertainty. Sensei Robert Mitchell moved through the dojo with the calm authority of a man who had spent decades here, his black belt frayed at the edges, soft as worn silk from years of sweat and repetition. His eyes swept over them as he called for the beginners to line up near the far wall, and for a fleeting second, Maya thought she saw something flicker there. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe even doubt. But it vanished almost as soon as it appeared, replaced by the impassive mask of an instructor who had seen too many students come and go to be moved by a pair of nervous 14-year-old girls. Jasmine reached for her sister's hand, their fingers threading together in that quiet, instinctive way they had always done since they were small. A silent promise to stand side by side, no matter what waited for them here. Around them, the other students shuffled and stretched, some casting curious glances their way, others ignoring them entirely, already lost in the comforting rhythm of kata and kihan drills. The room was alive with the sounds of effort, feet scuffing against the mats, the sharp crack of a well-timed block, the soft grunt of exertion as a student forced their body to obey. But over it all hovered the low hum of something else, something Maya felt in the tightness of her throat and the way her shoulders wanted to hunch inwards. The question that always seemed to hover in spaces like this, unspoken, but felt in every pause, every sideways glance. Do you belong here? In the far corner of the dojo, Carter Reynolds and Ethan Brooks stood with the easy predatory confidence of young men who had never been told no, often enough to believe it could ever apply to them. Carter's black belt hung low on his hips, the kanji characters embroidered in gold thread, catching the light like a challenge, while Ethan leaned against the mirrored wall with the casual arrogance of someone who knew exactly where he fit in this carefully structured world. Their eyes tracked the sisters as they moved to join the line of beginners, Carter's mouth curving in a smile that never reached his cold blue eyes, a smile that said he saw them and already knew what he thought of them. Jasmine's stomach twisted as she felt the weight of that gaze, but Maya squeezed her hand tighter, a silent message passing between them. Let them watch. Let them see. Sensei Mitchell clapped his hands sharply, cutting through the thickening silence, and began the class with a brisk efficiency that brooked no hesitation. He spoke of balance and breath, of the importance of foundation and discipline, his words weaving a tapestry of ancient wisdom and modern practicality that filled the room with a kind of sacred energy. The sisters listened intently, their feet planted firmly in horse stance, legs burning as they held the position longer than seemed possible, their arms raised in guard as if to hold back not just the weight of their own inexperience, but the unspoken doubt that pressed in from every direction. The first drills were simple, a series of blocks and punches that Sensei Mitchell demonstrated with fluid precision, his movements economical and powerful. Maya found herself mimicking him almost without thought, her body remembering the hours spent shadowboxing with her father in their small backyard, the dusty earth under her feet and the sound of cicadas in the trees. Jasmine moved beside her, their bodies unconsciously synchronizing the way they always had, two halves of a whole that had been forged in the quiet strength of their bond. For a moment, it felt almost easy, like maybe, just maybe, they could find a place here after all. But then Carter's voice cut through the steady rhythm of practice like a blade. "Look at the twins," he drawled, loud enough for half the room to hear, like watching monkeys try to figure out a math problem. The words sliced through Maya's focus, her fists tightening as a flush of anger rose in her chest. She saw Jasmine's eyes flicker to hers, wide and hurt, and felt the twin burn of that shame mirrored in her own face. Around them, a few of the other students shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Sensei Mitchell, standing less than 10 feet away, simply adjusted his stance and continued the drill, his face a calm mask that offered no refuge. Maya swallowed hard, her throat dry as she forced her body to move through the motions, her heart hammering in her chest like a drumbeat of defiance. She would not let him see her falter. She would not let him see her doubt. When Sensei called for sparring drills, Maya felt a knot of dread coil in her stomach. This was the part she had feared most, the part where her inexperience would be laid bare for everyone to see. The students paired off quickly, and she scanned the room for another yellow belt, hoping to find someone who would at least be fair. But Carter was already moving toward them, that same cold smile on his face, Ethan trailing close behind like a shadow. "Fresh meat," Carter said softly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Let's see if you've learned anything yet." Jasmine's hand tightened on her arm, but Maya forced herself to stand straight, her jaw set. "We're supposed to pair with other beginners," Jasmine said, her voice calm but firm, the analytical edge she always carried slipping through. "Don't worry," Ethan replied, his tone mocking as he tugged on his black belt. "We'll teach you something real." The casual racism in his voice hit Maya like a slap, but before she could react, Sensei Mitchell called for them to bow to their partners. She faced Ethan, her eyes locked on his, and in that moment, she understood exactly what this would be. Not a lesson, not a drill, a test, a message. She bowed low, her movements precise, and when she rose, her heart was a stone in her chest. She would not run. She would not yield. She would prove that she belonged here, no matter what they threw at her. The first moment of sparring passed in a blur of movement and breath, Maya's pulse pounding so hard she felt it in her ears, the taste of copper and fear bitter on her tongue. Ethan moved like he was dancing, his strikes sharp and controlled, each one a precise demonstration of his years of experience and a deliberate test of her defenses. She tried to remember everything her father had taught them in those long nights in the garage, his voice steady in the darkness. Stay low, stay mobile, don't give them an easy target. But Ethan's attacks were like the tide, relentless and impossible to hold back. He swept her legs with a flick of his foot that sent her sprawling, the mat cold and hard against her back. And she could see the smirk in his eyes. Even as he offered her a hand, she didn't take. "You dropped your guard," he said with false concern, his voice pitched for the benefit of Sensei Mitchell's wandering gaze. In a real fight, that's all it takes. She forced herself up, biting back the sting of shame as she readjusted her stance, her arms trembling but her chin high. Across the mat, she could see Jasmine with Carter, her twin's face set in that determined calm she had always carried like armor. But Maya could see the way Carter moved, every gesture meant to intimidate, to belittle. Jasmine's guard was up, but Carter didn't respect it. He closed the distance with a sudden rush, his fists moving in tight arcs that Maya could barely follow, and Jasmine was driven back step by step until her heels touched the edge of the mat. "Stay down there," Carter said after sweeping her feet out from under her, his tone casual and dismissive. "That's where you belong." Maya felt the words like a physical blow, her hands curling into fists at her sides as she watched her sister push herself back to her feet, the tremor in her limbs hidden behind that calm, quiet strength. Around them, the other students pretended not to see, their eyes flickering away the moment they met hers, but Maya felt every sideways glance, every uncomfortable shuffle that said the same thing. "You're on your own here." Sensei Mitchell called out corrections in a voice that never rose above mild instruction, never acknowledged the edge in Carter and Ethan's movements, the way their light contact drills landed like real strikes meant to bruise and break. "Focus on your stance," he said, as Ethan caught Maya in the ribs with a pulled kick that stole her breath. "Power comes from your foundation." She sucked in a breath, her vision blurring for a moment as she fought to stay upright, her twin struggle echoing in the back of her mind like a second heartbeat. When one of them hurt, both of them did. When one of them fell, both of them rose. They had been born sharing everything, the same laugh, the same stubborn fire, and Maya felt that bond like steel in her spine as she lifted her hands again. "Again," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. Ethan's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "If you insist," he murmured, and he came at her like he knew exactly how to break her spirit. In those endless minutes, the sparring became more than just drills. It became a quiet war, a proving ground that had nothing to do with karate and everything to do with the lines drawn in the minds of those who watched and those who struck. Every time Maya fell, she pushed herself back up. Every time Ethan's strikes landed, she forced herself to breathe through the pain. Across the mat, Jasmine did the same, her eyes meeting Maya's again and again, that silent promise passing between them. "We will not be broken." But the weight of the dojo pressed down on them like a living thing. The bright overhead lights casting everything into stark relief. The polished floors that had never seen feet like theirs. The white GIs that seemed to glow around the others like armor. The mirrored walls that showed them 1,000 times over. Two brown girls trying to hold their own in a world that wanted them to fail. When the final bell rang and Sensei called an end to sparring, Maya's legs felt like lead, her lungs burning with every breath. She and Jasmine gathered their gear in silence, the cold of the mat still clinging to their skin like a bruise that wouldn't fade. Around them, the room buzzed with quiet conversations and the low murmur of laughter that seemed to pass over them like a tide. Sensei Mitchell offered them a polite smile as they bowed out, his voice smooth, and even as he spoke to the class about discipline and respect. The irony of it tasted like ash on Maya's tongue, but she bowed low, her movements precise, because even now she refused to let them see her break. As they walked to the door, she could feel Carter and Ethan watching them, their voices low and mocking as they leaned against the equipment rack. "They won't last another month," Carter said, his tone casual and cruel. "Daddy's probably in prison anyway," Ethan added with a laugh that made Maya's blood go cold. She felt Jasmine stiffen beside her, the breath catch in her throat, but before either of them could turn back, the rumble of a familiar diesel engine cut through the air, and they saw their father's truck pulling into the lot outside. Daniel Taylor stepped out of the cab, his shoulders square and his eyes scanning the dojo with the practiced calm of a man who had spent years in places where danger was something you smelled in the air. Maya felt her pulse steady at the sight of him, but she forced her face into a careful smile as he approached, her gear bag heavy in her hand and the weight of unspoken words even heavier in her chest. "How was class?" he asked, his voice warm but edged with that quiet authority that had always made her feel safe. "Good," they said in unison, their voices weaving together like a shield. And even as she tasted the lie on her tongue, Maya held her head high. Because this wasn't just about them anymore. It was about every time someone like Carter or Ethan thought they could define who belonged and who didn't. It was about refusing to let anyone else tell their story. As they climbed into the truck, the evening air cool against their sweat-damp skin, Maya glanced at Jasmine, saw the reflection of her own quiet fury in her sister's eyes, and knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The drive home was quiet except for the low hum of the engine and the rhythmic rattle of the gear bags in the back seat, each bump in the road sending small echoes of pain through Maya's bruised ribs. She watched the familiar streets slide by outside the window, the neat rows of houses and manicured lawns a world away from the chaos and quiet violence of the dojo. Jasmine sat beside her, one hand absently tracing the edge of her belt where the fabric had started to fray from too many collisions with the mat. Their father drove with one hand on the wheel, his broad shoulders filling the cab, his eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror where he could see them both. "You girls are quiet tonight," he said finally, his voice calm but threaded with the weight of things left unsaid. Maya forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just tired," she said. It was true, but it wasn't the whole truth, and she knew he heard the gap in her words. "Tired's a good thing," Daniel said, his voice as steady as the hum of the engine. "Means you worked hard." Jasmine's fingers stilled on her belt, and she looked down at her lap. "Yeah," she said softly, her voice almost lost under the growl of the engine. Maya felt the weight of that single word settle between them like an unwelcome guest. Their father nodded once, his expression thoughtful, but he didn't press. He had always believed in letting them fight their own battles, always trusted that they would find their own way through whatever shadows the world threw at them. But Maya felt the shape of this battle growing in the silence of the truck cab, in the way Jasmine's shoulders curled inward even as she tried to sit up straight, in the way her own jaw ached from clenching it too hard. This wasn't just about bruises or sore muscles. This was about something deeper, something that reached past the body and into the heart. When they reached home, the house was warm and smelled of the curry their mother had left simmering on the stove. The comforting scent wrapped around Maya like a blanket as she stepped inside, her feet aching from the stiff dojo mats. But even that small comfort felt fragile tonight, as if it might shatter under the weight of everything they couldn't say. Jasmine excused herself almost immediately, heading for their shared bedroom with a mumbled promise to help with dishes later. Maya watched her go, the set of her shoulders speaking volumes, and for a moment she wanted to follow, to force her sister to talk, to name the thing they were both dancing around in the dark. But she knew that Jasmine needed her own space to process, just like she did. Their father lingered in the kitchen, his big hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea as he watched her unpack her gear. "You know," he said quietly, "you girls don't have to prove anything to anyone." Maya paused, her fingers still tangled in the straps of her bag. "We're not," she said automatically, but even as she said it, she felt the hollow ring of the words. Her father's eyes softened, but he didn't argue. "All right," he said finally, his voice low. "All right." That night, lying in the darkness of their bedroom, Maya listened to the soft sound of Jasmine's breathing in the bunk above hers. In the quiet, her mind replayed every moment of the evening, the sharp crack of Ethan's foot against her ribs, the way Carter's sneer had felt like poison in the air, the indifferent way Sensei Mitchell had looked past them as if they were invisible. She closed her eyes, feeling the dull ache of bruises blossoming across her skin like dark flowers. In the bunk above, Jasmine shifted, and in that small sound, Maya felt the echo of her own exhaustion and anger. She whispered into the darkness, her voice barely more than breath. "We're not going to let them win." A moment later, Jasmine's soft reply drifted down like a promise. "Never." In that single word, Maya felt the shape of their resolve solidify between them, a silent pact stronger than any belt or title. They had always been each other's fiercest defenders, always found their strength in the twin heartbeat of their bond. And now, that bond was the only thing standing between them and the quiet cruelty of a world that wanted them to fold. As sleep finally claimed her, Maya held on to that promise like a talisman, the only shield she had against the darkness that waited in the spaces between words and the silence of the dojo. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Morning light crept through the thin curtains, turning the soft pink of dawn into a sharp white glow that forced Maya's eyes open. She lay still for a moment, listening to the quiet of the house around her, the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant murmur of their father's voice on a work call in the next room. Jasmine was already up, her bunk empty, and the faint smell of soap told Maya she was in the shower, washing away the bruises that wouldn't scrub off no matter how hard she tried. Maya stretched, feeling every sore muscle complain, but she didn't wince. She wouldn't let herself. She had learned long ago that the world took any sign of weakness as permission to push harder. Downstairs, the kitchen was warm and filled with the comforting sense of breakfast, coffee, toast, the faint edge of cinnamon that their mother always insisted on adding to everything. Jasmine was at the table, her hair still damp, and pulled back into a tight braid that made her look older, sharper. She offered Maya a small smile as she poured 2 mugs of tea, the steam curling between them like a promise of comfort. "Morning," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Morning," Maya replied, settling into the chair opposite her. For a long moment, they just sat there in silence, the clink of their spoons and the mugs the only sound. It was a ritual as much as anything else, a small island of calm in a world that had shown them how quickly it could turn against them. Their father joined them a few minutes later, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, as he surveyed his daughters with that quiet, measuring look he had always worn when he thought they weren't watching. He said nothing about the stiffness in their movements or the new shadows under their eyes, just set his coffee down with a soft clink and reached for the morning paper. But Maya felt the question in every glance he sent their way, the silent worry he tried to hide behind small talk and headlines. She knew he was waiting for them to bring it up, to name the thing that had coiled around their hearts in the dojo and followed them home like a shadow. But they weren't ready. Not yet. After breakfast, Maya and Jasmine changed into their school clothes, the bright colors of their uniforms, a sharp contrast to the muted whites and blacks of the dojo. They moved through the motions of the morning, packing their bags, brushing their hair, checking their schedules, like soldiers donning armor for a battle no one else could see. At school, the day passed in a blur of half-heard lessons, and the endless drone of voices that never seemed to notice them. Maya found her mind drifting back to the dojo again and again, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the edge of her desk, as she replayed every moment of the night before, Carter's smirk, Ethan's casual violence, the cold indifference in Sensei Mitchell's eyes. She caught Jasmine's gaze across the room more than once, and in each glance they exchanged a wordless understanding. Tonight would be no different. The dojo was waiting, and so were the tests they knew would come. After school, they walked home together in the cool autumn air, the crunch of leaves underfoot a steady rhythm that matched the beat of their hearts. Their father's truck was gone when they arrived, off at some job site or another, and the house felt quiet in a way that made Maya's skin itch. In the garage, the heavy bag swung gently in the cold light, the canvas stained from years of impact. Maya ran her fingers over it, feeling the roughness under her skin, and thought of the promise they had made in the darkness. "We will not be broken." Jasmine came to stand beside her, her eyes dark and steady. "We should work on our footwork," she said softly, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. And so they did. For an hour they moved in the cold garage, the thud of fists against the heavy bag, a counterpoint to the silence that pressed in around them. Each strike was a wordless declaration. We are not victims. We are not prey. When their father came home that night, he paused in the doorway to watch them, his expression unreadable. He said nothing, just nodded once and turned back to the house. But Maya saw the flicker of pride in his eyes, the faint edge of relief that they were fighting back in their own way. Dinner was quiet, the conversation drifting around safe topics, school, chores, the small details of a life that felt increasingly distant from the battle being fought in the dojo. Their mother asked about practice, her voice warm and curious, and they smiled and nodded and told her what she wanted to hear. The truth stayed unspoken, wrapped in the shared looks and small touches that only they understood. That night, as they lay in the dark once more, Maya reached up to touch the edge of the bunk above her, her fingers brushing the wood in a silent goodnight. Jasmine's hand found hers, their fingers lacing together in the dark, and for a moment the quiet felt less like a weight and more like a promise. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the dojo and the battles waiting there. But tonight, they had each other, and that was enough. The following evening arrived like the first note of a storm, a sky painted in deep twilight, the air heavy with the promise of things left unspoken. Maya and Jasmine walked side by side to the dojo, their steps matching the soft tap of sneakers on cracked pavement, a rhythm they had shared since before they could remember. The warrior's path sign glowed in the failing light, the elegant brush strokes of kanji, whispering of ancient discipline and the promise of belonging. But for the sisters, it was more than a place to learn forms and stances. It had become a crucible, a test of spirit and endurance that neither of them could afford to fail. As they entered, the familiar scent of sweat and tatami mats wrapped around them, a smell that had become the background hum of their determination. The room was already alive with motion, students bowing, feet gliding across the polished floor, the low murmur of focused breath. Maya felt the eyes on them the moment they stepped inside, a flicker of curiosity, a trace of doubt, a question in every glance. What are you doing here? She let it wash over her like cold water, her chin lifting a fraction higher as she tightened her grip on her gym bag. Jasmine moved with that quiet grace she carried everywhere, her braid a dark line against the soft white of her GA, her eyes calm but fierce as they met every gaze without flinching. They had promised each other that they would not let this place define them, that they would not let Carter's sneers or Ethan's casual violence tell them who they were. But even so, the weight of those first weeks clung to their shoulders like a second uniform, heavy and unyielding. Sensei Mitchell was waiting by the front desk, his expression as calm and unreadable as always. "Yellow belts," he said, his voice measured, as if the color of their belts defined everything about them. Maya bowed low, the motion drilled into her muscles, but as she straightened, she saw the flicker in his eyes. A momentary glance that slipped past her and lingered on Jasmine, a silent assessment that made something cold settle in her chest. He knows, she thought. He sees, but he won't say. The evening's drills were harder tonight, the sweat on her forehead mixing with the sting of old bruises. Horse stance until her thighs burned and her calves screamed. Combinations drilled until her knuckles ached and her breath came in ragged gasps. But through it all, she watched Jasmine, watched the way her sister's focus never wavered, the set of her jaw that spoke of silent promises and unspoken defiance. Across the room, Carter and Ethan moved with that same casual arrogance, their black belts swaying with each measured step. They didn't bother to hide their amusement, their laughter low and pointed whenever Maya stumbled or Jasmine faltered. It was a language of dominance and dismissal, one that Maya had learned to recognize in every sneer and every soft, mocking chuckle. During the break, she found herself by the water fountain, the cool water a brief respite against the burn in her lungs. Jasmine joined her a moment later, her face flushed but her eyes bright, her shoulders rolled back with the quiet pride of someone who refused to be bowed. "They're watching," Jasmine said softly, her voice pitched for Maya alone. "They want us to quit." "We're not going to," Maya replied, the words sharp and certain even as her body trembled with exhaustion. "We can't." Jasmine nodded, a small smile ghosting across her lips. "Then, let's make sure they know it." When the sparring drills began, the dojo seemed to hold its breath. Sensei Mitchell called for partners, and Maya's pulse jumped as Carter and Ethan stepped forward, their eyes locked on the sisters like wolves scenting blood. "Again?" Carter said, his tone light but his gaze sharp. "You must really like the punishment." Maya felt Jasmine's hand brush her arm, brief, almost imperceptible, but enough to ground her. "We're ready," Jasmine said, her voice even and unshaken. The class moved aside, giving them space that felt both generous and isolating, a silent circle of white GIs and curious eyes. Sensei Mitchell's expression was unreadable as he gave the signal to begin, his hands folding behind his back as he watched. Ethan moved first, his strikes controlled and deliberate, testing Maya's defenses with the precision of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of making others feel small. She blocked as best she could, her breath ragged, her arms trembling with the effort of meeting each blow. Across from her, she saw Carter press Jasmine back with that same quiet cruelty, his movements efficient but just shy of malicious, enough to leave bruises that wouldn't show, enough to break spirits without ever crossing the line of what Sensei Mitchell would acknowledge. But tonight was different. Tonight, Maya felt the echo of her father's voice in every breath. "Stay low, stay sharp. Never let them think you're afraid." She shifted her weight, found the rhythm of Ethan's attacks, and for the first time she felt something shift in the space between them. When his foot swept out, she stepped into it instead of away, catching his balance in a way that made his eyes widen in brief, startled respect. Jasmine saw it too, and Maya felt that silent spark pass between them like an electric current. "We're still here." The sparring ended in a flurry of breath and sweat, and as they bowed to their partners, Maya saw the flicker of something in Ethan's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or the first crack in the polished armor of his certainty. It was small, but it was enough. As they gathered their things to leave, Carter leaned in close, his breath warm against Maya's ear. "This isn't over," he whispered, his voice low and dangerous. She didn't flinch. "Good," she said quietly. "We're just getting started." Outside, the air was cold and sharp, the sky washed in silver moonlight. Jasmine fell into step beside her, their shoulders brushing as they walked home in silence. The dojo was behind them, but the fight was far from over, and in the quiet of the night, with the echo of their footsteps on empty sidewalks, Maya felt the shape of something new forming in her chest, something hard and bright and unbreakable. They had been tested, they had been found wanting, but they had not been broken, not yet, and that was enough. The next day dawned cold and pale, the world outside their window wrapped in a hush of fog that seemed to muffle even the bird song. Maya and Jasmine woke with the same thought, unspoken but felt in every breath and glance. Tonight, they would return to that dojo again, and tonight, they would not bow to fear. School felt like a dream they'd woken from too early. Maya sat through algebra and chemistry, her mind elsewhere, the drone of the teacher's voice drowned out by the memory of the mat under her feet and the sting of Carter's mocking laughter. Jasmine seemed calm, as she always did, but Maya could see the tension in the set of her shoulders, the way her fingers drummed on her desk in a silent rhythm that matched the beat of her heart. At lunch, they sat together at the far end of the cafeteria, their heads close as they spoke in low voices. "We're getting better," Jasmine said, her eyes steady. "You felt it too, didn't you? Last night, the way he faltered." "I saw it," Maya said softly, a small smile curving her lips, despite the exhaustion in her bones. "He doesn't expect us to fight back. They never do." Jasmine's smile was fleeting, but it was real. "They think we're here to be their practice dummies," she said. "They don't know we're here to learn how to fight." The rest of the day passed in a blur of half-heard conversations and the slow tick of the clock on the wall. Each minute closer to the dojo felt like a countdown, a quiet drumbeat that echoed in the back of Maya's mind. When the final bell rang, she and Jasmine exchanged a glance. No words needed, no questions. They knew where they were going. They knew what they would face. And they knew, with the kind of certainty that could only be forged in blood and sweat, that they would face it together. At home, they dropped their school bags by the door and went straight to the garage. The heavy bag swung in the cold air, the faint scent of leather and sweat greeting them like an old friend. Their father's voice had always been in the back of their minds during these sessions, even if he wasn't there to watch. Keep your guard up. Move your feet. Don't stop until you're sure it's over. They worked in silence, the thud of fists and feet against the bag the only sound. Each strike was a wordless promise. We are not done. We are not done. When their father came home, he paused in the doorway to watch them, his expression hidden in the shadows. He said nothing, just nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement of what they were doing, of what they needed to do. Dinner was quiet that night, the soft clink of forks on plates filling the silence. Their mother asked about school, her voice warm and curious, and they answered as best they could. But the real answers were in the way their eyes met over the table, in the way Jasmine's foot tapped out a quiet rhythm under her chair. After the dishes were done, they went to their room to change into their GIs. The crisp white cotton felt like a second skin now, the yellow belt snug around their waists. In the mirror, they looked at themselves, two reflections, the same and yet different. Maya saw the faint bruise blooming on her cheekbone, the shadow of exhaustion under her eyes, and felt a surge of pride that pushed back against the fear. "Ready?" she asked, her voice low. Jasmine met her gaze in the mirror, her eyes calm and unflinching. "Always," she said. As they walked to the dojo, the cold air bit at their cheeks, but they didn't feel it. Their hearts were steady, their steps sure. Whatever waited for them tonight, Carter's sneers, Ethan's fists, Sensei Mitchell's silent indifference, it didn't matter. They would face it together. And that, more than anything else, was what made them dangerous. The dojo was already alive with motion when Maya and Jasmine arrived, the low thud of feet on mats and the sharp crack of strikes ringing out like a challenge in the cool night air. The overhead lights cast everything in a bright, unforgiving glow, every bruise, every scar, every ounce of determination visible in the mirror's reflection. Maya felt the knot of tension in her stomach tighten as they bowed at the door, their twin movements crisp and precise. Jasmine's eyes met hers for a brief moment, a silent spark passing between them. "We're here. We're ready." Sensei Mitchell called the class to order, his voice calm and even, but Maya could hear the thread of warning in it tonight. She wondered if he felt the shift in the air too, the way the unspoken tension seemed to hum in the space between every breath. Carter and Ethan were already on the floor, their black belts hanging easy around their hips. their eyes flicking to the sisters with that same cold amusement that had always been their weapon. But tonight, there was something else there too, something darker, more dangerous, a promise of escalation. As the warm-up drills began, Maya moved through the familiar motions, her mind sharp and focused. She felt the burn in her muscles, the ache in her shoulders, but she pushed it all aside. Pain was a given. What mattered was what she did with it. Jasmine moved beside her breath steady and controlled, each strike a quiet defiance. They flowed together, two halves of a single thought, and for a moment, Maya felt the flicker of something like peace, until she saw the way Carter's eyes tracked them, the way Ethan's smirk curved just a little too high. They're planning something tonight. The thought settled in her gut like ice, but she didn't let it show. She couldn't. When Sensei called for sparring, Maya's pulse jumped. She watched the pairs forming around the room, her eyes scanning for an opening, for someone else to partner with. But Carter and Ethan were already moving towards them, their steps slow and deliberate, like predators closing in on prey. "Ladies," Carter said softly, his voice smooth and dangerous. "Ready for another lesson?" Maya lifted her chin, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Always," she said. Sensei Mitchell's eyes flicked between them, but he said nothing. He simply nodded, and in that moment, Maya understood. Whatever happened tonight, they would have to survive it on their own. The first exchange was brutal. Carter moved like water, his strikes fast and fluid, testing Jasmine's defenses with a precision that was almost beautiful to watch, if it hadn't been aimed at breaking her down. Maya faced Ethan, his movements sharp and calculated, every step forward a challenge. She blocked and countered, her breath coming fast, her muscles burning with the effort of keeping up. But Ethan was relentless, each strike harder than the last, his smile a cold curve of satisfaction as he forced her back again and again. She felt the edge of the mat against her heels and knew she couldn't give another inch. She shifted her weight, remembering her father's voice. "Stay low. Stay sharp. Take the fight to them." She stepped in instead of back, her fists tight and controlled, and caught Ethan off guard with a quick jab to his ribs. The surprise in his eyes was a small victory, but it lit something fierce in Maya's chest. Across the mat, Jasmine found her opening too, her footwork tight and precise as she slipped under Carter's guard and landed a sharp palm strike to his chest. The impact was small, but it was enough. Enough to say, "We're not backing down." The room seemed to hold its breath for a moment, the hush of collective disbelief echoing in the space between strikes, and then it shifted. Carter's smile vanished, replaced by something colder, and he surged forward, his strikes losing their careful control. Ethan followed suit, his movements faster, harder, the line between training and real violence blurring until Maya could feel the heat of it in every breath. She blocked and countered, her body moving on instinct, every lesson her father had drilled into her coming alive in the rhythm of her strikes. But for every step forward, Ethan pushed back twice as hard, his foot catching her knee and sending her stumbling. She hit the mat hard, the impact rattling her teeth, but she rolled and came up again, her eyes locked on his, her breath steady. Jasmine was the same, bruised and breathless, but her stance unbroken, her focus like the edge of a blade. They moved as one, their bodies mirroring each other in that silent language they had shared since birth. And for a moment, Maya felt something close to invincibility. But even as they fought, she could see Sensei Mitchell watching from the sidelines, his eyes unreadable, his mouth a thin line of indifference. He saw everything, and he did nothing. The final blow came as the timer beeped, Carter's foot sweeping Jasmine's legs out from under her in a move that was too fast, too hard for light contact. She hit the mat with a sharp cry, her breath knocked from her lungs. Maya's vision went red as she turned to face Ethan, her fists up, her heart a drum in her chest. "Enough," Sensei said, his voice calm as he stepped forward, but the damage was done. As they bowed out, Maya saw the smirk on Carter's face, the cold amusement in Ethan's eyes, and she knew this wasn't over. Outside, the cold air hit her like a slap, but she welcomed it. Jasmine stood beside her, her breath shaky, her shoulders tight, but she didn't say a word. Neither of them did, because they both knew this wasn't just about karate anymore. This was about respect, about proving that they belonged no matter how many times they had to stand back up. And as they walked home, their steps slow and careful, Maya felt the burn of every bruise like a brand. But she also felt the quiet strength in her sister's hand when Jasmine reached out to squeeze hers, a silent promise that no matter how hard the world pushed, they would never break. Not together, not ever. The night air bit at their skin as Maya and Jasmine stepped out of the dojo, their breaths misting in the cold glow of the street lamps that lined the narrow parking lot. They walked in silence, each step deliberate and measured, as if the pavement itself might crumble beneath them if they faltered. Jasmine's knuckles were raw and red, a testament to the last, desperate flurry of strikes she had landed against Carter before the session ended. Maya's ribs ached with every breath, the bruises from Ethan's kicks blooming beneath her GI like purple flowers. But neither of them spoke of pain. Pain was a given. What mattered was that they had not yielded, they had not run. They had not let the quiet violence of Carter's smirk or the casual cruelty of Ethan's laughter define them. As they turned down the quiet residential street that led to their house, Maya felt Jasmine's hand brush against hers, their fingers linking together for a moment in the darkness. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of every promise they had ever made to each other. I see you. I stand with you. I will not let you fall. At home, their father's truck was in the driveway, the faint glow of the kitchen light spilling out into the darkness like a beacon. Maya paused at the front steps, her hand resting on the cold metal of the railing. "Do you think he knows?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jasmine was quiet for a moment, her eyes steady. "He sees more than he says," she murmured. "But he's waiting for us to tell him." Maya nodded, her fingers tightening on the railing. She knew their father well enough to understand that he would not push. He would let them find their own way to the truth, to the words that still caught in their throats. Inside, the house was warm and smelled faintly of their mother's cooking, curry and rice, the comfort of home woven into every breath. Their father sat at the table, a mug of coffee cradled in his broad hands, his eyes tracking them as they entered. He didn't say a word, but Maya felt the weight of his gaze like a question she wasn't ready to answer. They went through the motions of dinner in near silence, the scrape of forks on plates the only sound. Jasmine spoke softly of schoolwork, of a quiz she had aced in history, but her eyes never quite met their father's. Maya added details where she could, but her voice felt thin, stretched tight over the ache of her bruises. Their father listened, his nods careful, his smile gentle, but she could see the questions in the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders stayed tense even as he reached for the salt. After dinner, they cleaned up in the quiet rhythm of long habit. Jasmine washed, Maya dried, the steam from the sink rising around them like a warm fog. Neither of them spoke of the dojo, but the silence between them was alive with everything they couldn't say. The sting of Carter's blows, the cold, calculating precision of Ethan's strikes, the way Sensei Mitchell's eyes had passed over them like they were nothing. Later, in the darkness of their shared room, Jasmine's voice came softly from the top bunk. "We have to tell him soon." Maya lay still, staring up at the slats above her. "I know," she said, her voice a whisper in the dark. "But not yet." "Not yet," Jasmine agreed. And in those two words, Maya heard the echo of every night they had spent lying awake, sharing secrets and fears and dreams in the quiet hours when the world was asleep. Not yet meant soon. It meant we will, in the language only sisters spoke. Outside, the world was still and silent, the stars hidden behind a veil of clouds. But in the darkness of their room, Maya felt the quiet pulse of something fierce and unbreakable. They were battered, they were bruised, but they were not broken. And as long as they had each other, they never would be. The next morning, the sun rose pale and cold, the sky a muted canvas of soft grays that felt almost fragile in its quiet promise. Maya woke early, the faint ache in her ribs a dull thrum that reminded her with every breath of the night before. She lay still for a moment, listening to the soft, measured breathing of Jasmine in the bunk above her. The warmth of her sister's presence a quiet anchor against the weight of everything they had endured. Downstairs, the soft clink of dishes and the low murmur of their father's voice drifted up to them, a comforting ritual that had always marked the start of a new day. Jasmine stirred above her, and in that small sound, Maya heard the echo of the same thought. "We're not done yet." They dressed in silence, their fingers moving with practiced ease as they folded the crisp lines of their school uniforms over skin still tender from the dojo's lessons. In the mirror, Maya saw the faint outline of a bruise forming along her jaw, a shadow that seemed to catch the light with every small movement. She touched it once, her fingers gentle, then let her hand fall away. It wasn't shame she felt, it was something else, a quiet pride, a defiance that glowed in the space behind her eyes. Downstairs, their father watched them with a careful calm as they joined him at the table. He said nothing at first, his eyes moving between them with the slow, deliberate weight of a man who understood more than he spoke. The steam from his coffee curled up in soft spirals, filling the space between them with the scent of roasted warmth. "You girls ready for school?" he asked finally, his voice steady. Jasmine nodded, her shoulders straight, her eyes steady. "Always," she said softly. Maya added nothing, but she didn't look away. Their father's gaze lingered on them for a long moment, the silence between words filled with the quiet knowledge that this was no ordinary morning. But he didn't push. He simply nodded once, his approval in the small tilt of his head, and went back to his coffee. As they gathered their things, Maya felt his eyes on them, an unspoken promise of protection, of quiet strength that stood behind them, even when he said nothing at all. At school, the day passed in slow, measured beats. Maya felt every second like a pulse in her veins, her mind drifting back to the dojo, again and again. She thought of Carter's mocking smile, the way Ethan's strikes had found every weakness in her guard, the silence of Sensei Mitchell as he watched it all unfold. But she also thought of Jasmine's quiet defiance, the way her sister had moved with a calm that felt like a prayer, a promise that, no matter how hard the world pushed, they would not yield. After school, they walked home together, the autumn chill crisp in the air, their breath visible in soft white clouds. Jasmine's fingers brushed against hers as they walked, the warmth of that small touch, a wordless reassurance. At home, they went straight to the garage. The heavy bag waited in the cold light, its battered surface a silent witness to every quiet promise they had made. They trained in silence, the soft thud of fists, and the quiet hiss of breath, the only sounds. Each strike was a wordless declaration. We are not finished. We will not be broken. When their father came home, he paused in the doorway of the garage, his silhouette framed by the pale glow of the setting sun. He watched them for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then he stepped forward, his big hands resting on the edge of the doorway like a sentinel. "You girls are strong," he said quietly, his voice steady. "But strength isn't just in your fists, it's in your heart. Don't forget that." Maya felt the words settle into her chest like a stone in still water, the weight of them both grounding and liberating. She nodded once, her breath coming in soft clouds, and for a moment the quiet of the garage felt like a sanctuary. That night, as they lay in their beds, the soft darkness of the room wrapped around them like a blanket. Jasmine's breathing was slow and even above her, and Maya felt the quiet certainty of her sister's presence like a heartbeat in the dark. Outside, the world moved on, the small, ordinary sounds of the neighborhood drifting in through the window. But in the quiet of their room, Maya felt the shape of something unbreakable forming between them, a promise forged in every bruise, every quiet breath, every unspoken word. They were not finished, they were not broken, and as long as they stood together, they never would be. 2 days later, the dojo felt colder than usual, the polished floors gleaming like ice under the fluorescent lights that buzzed softly above. Maya and Jasmine stepped inside, with the quiet confidence that had become their armor, their yellow belts tied tight around their waists, their eyes steady. Around them, the other students moved through their warm-ups with practiced ease, the low thud of feet on mats and the soft swish of jizz in motion, weaving a rhythm that was both familiar and foreign. Sensei Mitchell watched from the sidelines, his arms folded across his chest, his gaze calm and unreadable. But Maya felt the weight of that gaze like a pressure against her skin, a silent promise that tonight would be no easier than the nights before. Carter and Ethan stood together near the equipment rack, their black belts stark against the white of their uniforms, their laughter low and private. Maya met Carter's eyes for a moment across the room, saw the flash of amusement there, the promise of another test, another night of proving herself against fists that never seemed to tire. But she didn't look away. Neither did Jasmine. When Sensei Mitchell called for sparring, the room shifted around them, the quiet buzz of conversation fading into the measured calm of focused breath. Partners found each other quickly, the small shuffles and nods of routine, forming a dance that Maya and Jasmine had come to know well. Carter and Ethan moved towards them, with that same deliberate ease, their smiles sharp and knowing. "Ladies," Carter said softly, his voice low enough to be almost tender. "Ready for tonight's lesson?" Jasmine's chin lifted a fraction, her eyes steady. "We're ready," she said simply. The class gathered around the edges of the mats, a silent circle of white G's and curious eyes. Sensei Mitchell watched it all, with that same calm indifference, his face a mask of professional focus. The first clash of fists and feet was almost gentle, the measured cadence of traditional sparring, tap, block, counter, reset. But beneath the surface, Maya felt the quiet current of challenge, the push and pull of something that went deeper than technique. Carter pressed Jasmine back with precise strikes, his movements fluid and almost lazy, as if he were toying with her. Ethan's attacks were sharper, more direct, each blow a test of Maya's resolve. She blocked and countered, her breath coming hard and fast, the rhythm of the fight pounding in her ears like a drumbeat. For a moment, she saw a flicker of respect in Ethan's eyes, a crack in the cold amusement that had always been his shield. But then he pressed harder, his strikes losing the careful control of sparring and slipping into something darker. She stumbled under the weight of a low kick that caught her thigh, the impact sending pain lancing through her leg. She bit back a cry, her jaw tight, and pushed forward instead of back, her fists tight and controlled. Across the mat, Jasmine met Carter's attacks with that same quiet determination, her footwork sharp, her breath steady. Maya could see the way her sister's eyes tracked every movement, the way she absorbed each blow and answered it with calm precision. And in that moment, Maya felt a surge of pride that burned away the ache in her muscles and the sting of her bruises. The room seemed to hold its breath around them, the quiet intensity of the fight drawing every gaze, every silent question of who will break first. But Maya knew the answer before the question was even asked. They would not break. They would not yield. When Sensei Mitchell finally called an end to the sparring, Maya's chest heaved with exhaustion, her fists trembling at her sides. Jasmine's face was flushed, a small cut blooming on her lip, but her eyes were calm and clear. They bowed to their partners, the ritual of respect, a sharp contrast to the quiet war that had just played out between them. As they turned to leave the mat, Carter leaned in close, his breath warm against Maya's ear. "This isn't over," he whispered, his voice a promise. She didn't flinch, she didn't smile. She simply met his gaze with steady eyes and said the only words that mattered. "Good." Outside, the night air was cool against their sweat-damp skin, the stars bright above them in the clear sky. Jasmine walked beside her in silence, her steps sure and steady. And in the quiet between them, Maya felt the echo of every promise they had ever made, every night spent training in the cold garage, every quiet vow spoken in the dark. They would not break, they would not yield, and they would not forget. Not now, not ever. The following day dawned with a chill that bit through the layers of Maya's hoodie as she walked to school, her breath hanging in the frosty air like a promise. Jasmine moved beside her, her braids swinging against her back, her expression calm but resolute. They didn't talk much on the walk. There were no words left to say that hadn't already been spoken in the quiet of their shared room or the hard snap of fists against the heavy bag in their garage. The world around them felt the same, but Maya carried the knowledge of last night like a shield. They had not been broken, and that was enough. At school, whispers and sideways glances still followed them down the halls, but neither girl let it touch them. Maya saw it in the flick of Jasmine's eyes when someone stared too long, the small lift of her chin that said, "We are not afraid of you." In the lunchroom, they sat alone at the far end of the table, their trays untouched as they leaned close to one another, their voices low. "They're going to keep pushing," Jasmine said, her fingers tracing the rim of her water bottle. "I know," Maya replied, "but so are we." The determination in her sister's eyes was a mirror of her own, and for a moment they sat in the silence that only siblings could understand, a quiet space that said, "Whatever comes, we face it together." After school, they walked home in the cold, the weight of their school bags nothing compared to the weight of what waited for them that night. Their father's truck was in the driveway, the faint scent of engine oil and the comforting warmth of home, a small comfort in the biting air. Inside, the kitchen was warm, the smell of cumin and garlic drifting from the stove where their mother worked. She turned and smiled at them as they entered, her face soft with pride and worry. "You girls look tired," she said gently. "Hard practice?" "It's always hard," Maya said softly, and her mother's smile faltered for just a moment, the unspoken questions in her eyes. But she didn't press, and Maya was grateful. After dinner, they slipped out to the garage, their footsteps soft on the cold concrete floor. The heavy bag waited in the half-light, its surface battered and worn from months of quiet war. Maya took a deep breath and squared her shoulders, the cool air filling her lungs and sharpening her focus. Jasmine joined her, her eyes calm and steady. "Footwork first," she said, her voice quiet but sure. Then combinations. And so they began, slow and careful at first, each movement deliberate, each step measured. The thud of fists against the bag echoed in the cold space, a steady rhythm that matched the beat of their hearts. Their father appeared in the doorway at some point, his broad shoulders filling the frame. He watched them without a word, his gaze soft but unyielding, a silent sentinel in the twilight. When they paused to catch their breath, he stepped forward, his voice calm. "You girls are getting faster," he said, and Maya saw the flicker of pride in his eyes. "But remember, speed without control is just wasted motion. Keep your mind clear." Maya nodded, her breath coming hard, sweat cooling on her skin. Jasmine offered a small smile, her eyes bright in the dim light. "We will," she said softly. When he left, they resumed in silence, their movements crisp and sure. In those moments, Maya felt the quiet bond between them grow even stronger, each step forward a promise, each breath a vow. Whatever waited for them at the dojo, they would meet it with open eyes and steady hearts. That night, as they lay in their beds, Maya felt Jasmine's fingers brush the edge of the bunk above her. "We're getting stronger," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "I know," Maya whispered back, her voice calm and certain. "And tomorrow, they'll see it." Outside, the world lay still and silent, the stars hidden behind a blanket of winter clouds. But in the quiet darkness of their room, Maya felt something powerful flicker to life in her chest, a fire that no amount of bruises or whispered taunts could extinguish. Tomorrow, they would face the dojo again. And tomorrow, they would not bow. The next evening, the air outside was biting cold, the breath of winter settling over the neighborhood in a hush that seemed to still even the whisper of leaves in the trees. Maya and Jasmine walked the familiar path to the dojo, their yellow belts tied tight around their waists, their hearts steady with the quiet confidence that had grown in the marrow of their bones. Every step was measured, every breath a silent promise. "We will not break." When they reached the warrior's path, the soft glow of the overhead lights spilled across the sidewalk, warm and inviting. But Maya knew better. Beyond those doors, there was nothing of comfort waiting for them, only the tests they had come to embrace. Inside, the familiar rhythm of the class filled the air, students bowing in, Sensei Mitchell's voice calm and sure as he guided them through warm-ups and drills. But tonight, Maya felt the weight of every gaze that flickered her way, the low hum of curiosity and doubt that had settled around them since that first night of quiet defiance. She met each glance head-on, her chin lifted, her eyes steady. They would not look away. Sensei Mitchell called for sparring, his voice carrying the authority of years spent shaping bodies and minds in this space. Maya felt her pulse quicken as partners formed around the room, the small shuffles of feet and the quiet tap of fists against open palms filling the space with anticipation. Carter and Ethan moved towards them with the same easy arrogance, their black belts like a promise of what they believed was theirs alone, the right to dominate, to control. But tonight, Maya felt no fear, only a calm that settled deep in her chest, a certainty that had been forged in the cold garage under her father's quiet watch and her sister's unwavering gaze. "Ladies," Carter said softly, his voice smooth as silk but edged with the promise of another test. "Ready?" Jasmine nodded, her expression calm. "Always." The sparring began in silence, the small sounds of effort and breath, the only punctuation to the careful dance of fists and feet. Ethan moved with precision, his strikes sharp and fast, but Maya met each one with the calm she had learned in the quiet hours of their secret training, slipping past his guard, her counters quick and controlled. Across the mat, Jasmine faced Carter with the same quiet strength, her movements fluid and sure as she stepped into each strike, turning every attack into an opening. The room around them seemed to hold its breath, the soft thud of feet on tatami, the hiss of breath between teeth. Each moment stretched thin and sharp. Maya felt every impact, every bruise blossoming under her skin like a dark flower. But she did not falter. She did not break. She felt the shape of her sister's movements in the corner of her eye, each pivot, each parry, and it was as if they were moving as one, two halves of a single will that refused to yield. Ethan's strikes grew harder, the quiet edge of frustration in his eyes sharp as glass, but Maya only moved faster, each block and counter a quiet defiance. Carter's face was tight with concentration, his breath coming hard, but Jasmine met him with calm eyes and steady fists, the slow burn of her determination turning every blow aside. When Sensei Mitchell called an end to the round, the room exhaled as one, the tension crackling in the air like static. Maya stood with her breath coming fast, her shoulders heaving, but her eyes never left Ethan's. Jasmine bowed to Carter, the motion precise, her gaze calm and unflinching. They gathered their gear in silence, the quiet of the dojo wrapping around them like the hush before a storm. Outside, the night was deep and still, the cold biting at their skin as they stepped into the darkness. Jasmine's hand found Maya's in the quiet space between steps, her fingers warm and sure. "We're almost there," she said softly, her voice a promise. Maya nodded, her breath steady in the cold air. "Almost," she agreed. And in that moment, she knew that whatever waited for them next, whatever final test Carter and Ethan had planned, they were ready. They had faced the worst this place could throw at them, and they had not broken. They would not break. Not tonight. Not ever. The next day passed in a blur of anticipation, each hour measured by the slow drip of the clock and the quiet thrum of determination in their veins. Maya felt every second like a weight in her chest, her thoughts spinning around the certainty of what tonight would bring. Jasmine moved through the day with the same calm she always wore, her shoulders straight and her gaze steady. But Maya could see the quiet tension in the way her fingers drummed on the edge of her desk, the way her eyes flicked to the clock every few minutes. After school, they walked home in silence, the crisp air biting at their cheeks, the weight of what waited for them settling over their shoulders like a mantle. At home, they trained in the garage one last time before the evening, short, focused bursts of drills, each strike a silent promise. "We are ready." Their father watched from the doorway, his eyes calm but sharp, the quiet strength in his presence a steady anchor against the storm of their thoughts. He didn't speak, but when they finished, he stepped forward and rested a hand on each of their shoulders, the weight of his hands grounding and sure. "You know what you have to do," he said quietly. "Remember who you are." "We do," Jasmine said softly, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. Maya nodded, her breath steady. "We're ready, Dad." At the dojo, the air was electric with something unspoken, a hum of tension that made the hairs on Maya's arms stand on end as they stepped inside. Sensei Mitchell's eyes followed them as they bowed in, his expression calm but watchful, and for a moment, she wondered if he felt the same quiet storm that crackled in the air around them. Carter and Ethan stood near the center of the mat, their black belts tied with casual precision, their laughter low and private. Maya met Carter's eyes for a moment, saw the promise in the curve of his smile, the final test, the last chance to break them. But she didn't flinch, neither did Jasmine. When the class began, every motion felt like a prelude, the warm-up drills a quiet thunder that echoed in the spaces between their breaths. Maya felt the burn in her muscles, the soft ache of old bruises beneath her GI, but she moved with the calm of someone who knew that pain was just another test to be passed. Sensei Mitchell's voice was low, and even as he called for sparring partners, his eyes lingering on the sisters for just a moment longer than necessary. Maya felt the hush that fell over the room, the way every gaze seemed to turn their way. But she didn't look away. She met Carter's eyes, her chin lifting in silent challenge. "Let's finish this." "Ladies," Carter said softly, his voice smooth as always. But there was something else there tonight, an edge of frustration, a flicker of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. Jasmine bowed low, her movements calm and precise. "We're ready," she said. The sparring began in the hush of the room, every footstep and breath a quiet testament to the weight of what was happening. Carter moved first, his strikes sharp and deliberate, but Jasmine was a shadow before him, each block and counter a silent promise that she would not yield. Ethan's attacks were faster tonight, harder, the weight of every strike a demand that Maya back down. But she didn't. She met each blow with the calm fury her father had taught her, each counter-strike a quiet vow. "I will not break." Around them, the room seemed to close in, the soft thud of feet on the mat and the low hiss of breath filling the space with a rhythm that felt like the beat of their hearts. Maya felt every impact like a brand, her arms trembling with the effort of holding the line, but she would not yield. Not tonight. Not ever. Across the mat, Jasmine slipped past Carter's guard, her palm striking his chest in a quick, precise blow that made his breath catch. For a moment, everything stopped. The room, the fight, the weight of every gaze. And in that stillness, Maya saw the flicker of shock in Carter's eyes. And then he surged forward, his movements losing the careful precision of sparring and slipping into something raw and angry. Ethan followed suit, his strikes harder, faster, his breath coming in sharp gasps as he pressed Maya back. But she didn't back down. She met him strike for strike, her breath steady, her mind clear. And in that final moment, when Ethan's fist came at her one last time, she stepped inside his guard, her father's lessons ringing in her ears. Don't fight to win. Fight to end it. Her fist struck his ribs with a sharp crack that echoed in the hush of the dojo, and Ethan stumbled back, his breath gone, his eyes wide. Across the mat, Jasmine met Carter's final lunge with a calm deflection, her foot sweeping his leg out from under him in a single, clean motion. He hit the mat hard, the sound of impact a punctuation in the quiet of the room. And just like that, it was over. The dojo held its breath, the weight of what had happened settling over them like the hush of winter snow. Sensei Mitchell's eyes were unreadable, his silence heavy, but Maya didn't care. She looked at Jasmine, her sister's breath coming in quiet gasps, her eyes bright and calm. They had not broken, they had not yielded, and they never would. The hush that followed their final sparring match was as deep as the ocean. Maya could feel it in her bones, the silence pressing in on her ears like the weight of the entire dojo. Carter and Ethan lay stunned on the mat, their faces a mixture of disbelief and quiet rage, their black belts twisted at their waists like chains that no longer carried any power. Maya stood still, her breath ragged but her posture unbroken. She could feel the trembling in her arms, the ache in her legs, but she did not show it. Beside her, Jasmine was the same, her shoulders squared, her face calm and resolute, the faint trace of a smile at the edge of her lips. Sensei Mitchell stepped forward at last, his hands clasped behind his back, his face as calm and unreadable as always. He looked at the twins for a long moment, his gaze steady and searching, and for the first time, Maya saw something flicker there, something that might have been respect or regret, or the quiet recognition of two girls who had proven what no one else had dared to believe. He cleared his throat. "Enough for tonight," he said simply, his voice even and low. The other students began to move slowly around them, the quiet hum of conversation and the soft shuffle of feet filling the space once more. But for Maya and Jasmine, the world had narrowed to a single point of calm, this moment, this breath, the quiet certainty of what they had just done. They gathered their things in silence, the dojo's bright lights reflecting off the polished floor, the smell of sweat and resin thick in the air. Carter and Ethan watched them as they moved, their eyes hard and angry, but neither of them spoke. Maya met Carter's gaze once more, saw the frustration and shame and something else, something that looked almost like fear, and she lifted her chin a fraction higher, her eyes calm. Outside, the night was cold and clear, the moon a pale sliver in the sky above them. Jasmine walked beside her, their shoulders brushing, the quiet rhythm of their steps steady and sure. Neither of them spoke until they were halfway home, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot the only sound. "We did it," Jasmine said finally, her voice low and even, but Maya could hear the quiet triumph in it, the note of relief that tasted like victory. Maya nodded. "Yeah," she said softly. "We did." They fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now, no longer heavy with fear or doubt, but alive with the quiet certainty of what they had proven. At home, their father was waiting in the kitchen, the warm light spilling out onto the porch as they stepped inside. He looked up as they entered, his eyes sharp and watchful, and for a moment, the three of them just stood there, the weight of the night hanging between them. Then he nodded once, a small, quiet motion that said everything he couldn't find the words to say. "I'm proud of you," he said softly, his voice rough with feeling. "Both of you?" Jasmine's smile was small but bright, her eyes shining in the kitchen light. "Thank you, Dad," she said, her voice steady and sure. Maya felt something warm unfold in her chest, something that made the bruises and the aches and the quiet exhaustion of her body feel like nothing at all. She looked at her father, her breath steady. "We're not done," she said quietly. "Not yet." He nodded again, his smile faint but certain. "I know," he said, "but tonight you've shown them who you are, and that's enough." That night, as they lay in the quiet of their room, Maya felt the calm settle deep in her bones. Jasmine's breathing was soft and even above her, the faint rustle of sheets as she shifted in the dark. Maya reached up and tapped the wooden slats of the bunk bed once, a quiet signal, a promise. Jasmine's hand came down to meet hers, their fingers brushing in the darkness, and for a moment, the world was perfect in its stillness. They had faced the worst the dojo could throw at them. They had proven themselves against the boys who thought they owned the mat, the whispers of those who said they didn't belong, and they had won, not just the fight, but the quiet battle that had been waged in every breath, every look, every doubt. They were not done. But tonight, for the first time, they could rest. They could breathe, and they could dream of the fights yet to come. 1 week later, the dojo was a different world. The familiar scent of sweat and resin still hung in the air. The polished wood floor still gleamed beneath the bright overhead lights, but Maya could feel the shift in the quiet space between each breath. She and Jasmine stepped onto the mat with the calm certainty of girls who had faced the worst and come out standing, their yellow belts tied tight and sure. Around them, the other students watched with a quiet deference that had not been there before, a hush of curiosity and respect that said, "They see us now." Sensei Mitchell called the class to order with the same calm authority he always wore, but Maya saw the flicker of something new in his eyes when he looked at them. Recognition, maybe, or the quiet weight of a lesson learned too late. "Tonight," he said, his voice low and steady, "we will work on control, on precision, on the discipline that separates strength from power." Maya felt the words settle in her chest like a quiet challenge, but she did not flinch. She knew what they meant. She knew what was coming. The class moved through forms and drills with practiced ease, but Maya's focus never wavered. Every step, every breath, she felt the echo of her father's quiet instructions in the garage, the calm weight of Jasmine's gaze beside her. When Sensei Mitchell called for sparring, Maya's pulse quickened, her breath steady and sure. Carter and Ethan stood across the mat, their black belts still tied with the easy confidence of boys who thought the world was theirs to command. But tonight, Maya saw something else in their eyes, something that looked like doubt, like fear. The first exchange was calm, measured. Maya moved with the quiet precision she had learned in the cold of winter nights, her body a fluid dance of strikes and counters. Ethan's attacks came sharp and fast, but she met each one with the calm of someone who had learned to see beyond the strike, to the intention behind it. Across the mat, Jasmine faced Carter with the same quiet grace she had carried since the beginning, her movements light and sure, her breath a steady rhythm that matched the beat of Maya's heart. The world narrowed to the thud of feet on the mat, the hiss of breath between teeth, the soft slap of fists and feet against cotton. And in that hush, Maya felt the shape of victory in her bones, a quiet certainty that no matter how hard Carter and Ethan pushed, no matter how many times the world tried to tell them they didn't belong, they would not yield. They would not break. In the final exchange, Carter lunged forward, his strike fast and hard, but Jasmine was faster. Her foot swept his leg out from under him, the motion so clean it was almost beautiful. He hit the mat with a sharp thud, the silence that followed as deep as the ocean. Ethan tried to press forward, his strikes desperate now, but Maya met him with calm eyes and a steady hand. She stepped inside his guard, her palm striking his chest in a motion so sure and practiced it felt like breathing. He stumbled back, his breath gone, his eyes wide. And just like that, it was over. The dojo held its breath around them, the quiet weight of what had just happened settling over every watching eye. Sensei Mitchell stepped forward, his face calm, but his voice carrying a weight that Maya felt in her bones. "That's enough," he said softly. Carter and Ethan stood slowly, their faces pale, their pride bruised and battered in a way no fist could match. Maya and Jasmine bowed low, their movements calm and sure, and in that simple motion, Maya felt the shape of every promise they had ever made to each other. We belong here. We are enough. Outside, the night was cold and bright, the stars scattered like salt across the black sky. They walked home in silence, their steps sure, the weight of the world light on their shoulders for the first time in months. At home, their father waited in the doorway, his smile quiet but fierce. He didn't ask if they had won. He didn't need to. He saw it in their eyes, in the calm grace of their movements, in the quiet way they carried themselves like warriors who had claimed their place in the world. "I'm proud of you," he said softly, his voice rough with feeling. Maya smiled, the ache in her bones nothing compared to the fire in her chest. "We're proud of us too," she said. Jasmine reached for her hand, their fingers lacing together in the dark. And in that small, quiet space, Maya felt the shape of their victory settle in her bones. A promise that no matter what the world threw at them next, they would not face it alone. They would not break, they would not bow, and they would never forget the quiet power that had carried them through every fight, every doubt, every night spent in the hush of their shared determination. The world was theirs, and they were ready. As the final echoes of fists on mats fade into the night, the Thompson sisters walk away not just as fighters, but as warriors who have claimed their place in a world that tried to push them out. In the quiet glow of streetlights and the steady warmth of each other's presence, they've proven that courage isn't just about strength, it's about refusing to bow. Their journey isn't over, but tonight, they've shown that respect can't be given. It has to be taken. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt the weight of someone else's expectations trying to hold you down, share your thoughts below and subscribe for more stories of strength and justice. Let's stand together, because no matter the challenge, we rise.